Hi, my name is Sade Holtz, and I would like to talk about um, the role of white evangelicals in perpetuating white supremacy, which dates back historically at America's inception, but is being perpetuated today in primarily in their lack of support for people of color and people, black people especially, and people who've been oppressed by systemic racism and social structures, and the privilege that they have to feel that they don't have to be involved. I never really considered myself a social justice worker, not social justice worker, social justice warrior. I'm in school for social work, so social work is kind of linked together a lot. But anyway, I never really considered myself a social justice warrior until recent years, and it's because I initially thought that it meant that you're hitting the pavement and you're, you know, making signs and shouting for what's right, which I love and admire. But due to my chronic illness, that isn't a safe place for me to be, especially with all the police brutality. But over time, I learned that there are so many ways to be supportive and to use your voice for social justice. So, what is social justice, right? It's actively being motivated to to assist in the breakdown of social structures and systemic racism through advocacy and awareness, and using your resources to help aid that dismantling of those structures in any kind of way that you can. So I realized that there is space for me to implement social justice, to fight for social justice, and and stay within my boundaries, health wise and life wise in general. And for me, I found that in social media and Black Twitter, and it's not like I have a ton of followers or anything, but I think what's important is the people that are following me. And I have a lot of connections to the white community, to white evangelicals. And I think my experiences and perceptions as a Black woman are important, and a chance for them to hear and get a better understanding that is outside of what they've heard in their perspectives or the bubbles that they might live in themselves. So, in these recent years, I found myself having a lot of what I should say, primarily with this like social justice awakening that has occurred right lately, with in the midst of Trumpism and also the pandemic and all the stuff that's going on. So many people are like, "Whoa, I didn't." Well, I'm sorry, forgive me. What I think really jump started this was police brutality. Let's put that out there, flat out. Police brutality and the brutality that was inflicted upon George Floyd, and seeing these videos that are just monstrous is the only word that I can think of right now. Is what like took the rose colored glasses off of a lot of white people, I think. And so I started having conversations with my white evangelical friends. And for a little backstory, I attend a predominantly white church. I have since I moved to the suburbs for various reasons, but I don't think you need like my whole life story at the moment. But at the end of the day, I've attended the church that I attend for maybe like 7 years now. And I noticed a very distinct shift in my comfort there during the Trump presidency, during his election and his second election. And it was because I was laughing and talking and worshiping with people that I considered friends for so many years. But then when all the Trump stuff started happening, I noticed, people are on Facebook and on other forms of social media, supporting this man, and and the racist sentiment that comes with supporting him, his negative views on the black community. Let's say, for example, the dog whistle of clearing out the suburbs, of cleaning up the suburbs, basically getting black people out of them. But also think about his views on immigrants and on, gosh, mine is escaping me, but anything that's like supporting social resources for the lesser of these, right? Let's think about that. But, an overwhelming amount of Christians are supporting him. Oftentimes, the excuse that I heard was their feelings about him and abortion. But it's like, what about all these other things that Christ cares about, that Trump does not care about? So the data that backs it up is like after his first 100 days in office, 78% of white evangelicals supported him and felt that he was doing a great job. Something that sticks out to me is an article from the New Yorker by Michael Liu, and he talks about Frederick Douglass's memoir and just Brother Douglass's frustration with white Christians back in that time and the hypocrisy of owning slaves and at the same time claiming to be a man or woman of Christ. And he said it was just the biggest fraud of that time to try to pretend that the two aren't mutually exclusive. And we can also think about during the Great Awakening, George Whitefield, who was a prominent evangelist of that time, was quoted basically saying, like, God's okay with us owning slaves. You just have to treat them humanely, right? And so when we think about, historically, how white Christians had like an overwhelming amount of support for slavery and the systems that kept slavery in place, Whitefield himself voted to continue legislation for slavery, for example. When we think about that and then look at today, how Christians are still like, yeah, you're not supporting slavery, but you're supporting systems that oppress black people and people of color and just blindly doing it. And so I found myself having these conversations with people that I thought were my peers and trying to get some empathy and understanding as to why it felt hurtful for them to support this sort of person. And I often like found myself having to explain like my blackness and my Christianity and how the two are very important for me, and that because I even like when we think of counter narratives, right? I ran into people who didn't realize racism was still such a big deal. Didn't Some who couldn't understand how they have white privilege and why they should be accountable for things that happened hundreds of years ago by at their forefathers' hands, right? And so I had to explain how, like, look, hey, they were making money off the backs of my ancestors, money that you're still benefiting from to this day. And on top of that privilege, just the privilege of your skin in a country that is built off of racism, that racism has seeped into the structures. So you have all these extra check marks. You're born with these check marks by your name just because of the color of your skin. And to like, I had these conversations where it was just really hard for some of them to grasp that, because they had these check marks, they should do something about it. And I think that's what's been the bulk of my conversation, and why I say that white evangelicals have a cross to bear in dismantling structural racism, because like your people were so instrumental in building in building the problem. And now that everything is coming to the surface and everyone is in this conversation, you don't have the privilege. Well, you do have the privilege and have been exerting the privilege to stay silent and continue supporting the structures. But if you truly claim to be Christians and support the values and ideals of Christ, you would want to be active in dismantling them. And I've noticed that, and only from my experience, nothing is like actively being done. So, the next question is like, okay, what do you do? What can white evangelical churches do? Well, one, they could be putting their funds to organizations that support social justice, like the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think also on a very intimate level, they could be having conversations about what's going on, letting people who are outside their bubble come in and explain to them their perspectives, and break down some of the biases and the things that they've learned through being within the bubble for so long, and just having, you know, things that aren't true being confirmed over and over. Um, for example, I once heard my pastor refer to the Black Panther Party as terrorist, and I was beside myself. I didn't know what I was just so in shock, because I had never in my life heard the Black Panthers referred that way. And it was just a testament to, like, it made me realize how much they truly don't know, and how much wrong has been taught within their bubble of experience. And sadly, I didn't address him directly about that, because it was just too sensitive a matter for me. Like, I was just too beside myself. And later we did have other conversations, but we didn't discuss um, that. I'm going to be honest. I did bring it up, but not particularly about like when he said it. I just, like, in another one of our conversations, I just added like the true motivations of the Black Panther Party, and who they really were, and the way they supported communities and fed people, and wanted change. And anyway, um, yeah, I think a big part of it is white evangelicals and the bubble that they tend to live in. And I've read articles about people who, not only have I read articles, but I've experienced firsthand with peers in college, and as well as peers at my church. They grow up in church, they then go to a Christian school, and then they go from that school to a Christian college and a Christian seminary, and everything that they're getting in is like, if it's not Christian, it's not, if it's not supporting what I've learned in this spectrum, then it's not valid. It's not important. I've I've like recommended books to my pastor, and I, send it over, and the first question is like, is this author Christian? And like, I understand wanting that, right? But I don't think that's the first question you have to ask. I don't think that's what's most important. I think what's most important is the content of the text, not whether or not this author is a Christian, or if they're gay, or if, whatever they're doing in their personal life. It's like, are they, saying, are they telling the truth? And so those are some of the things that I've come up against. But, again, when we think about social justice, I feel that having access to this community, having connections with people that are sincere and people that I sincerely love, who I find just don't know, just unfortunately are ignorant about particular things, that I feel I do have a bit of a response. It really isn't, it's not my responsibility, but because I care about them and have a personal connection, I feel, the onus is on me to help guide them in the way of educating themselves. It's not on me to teach you how to not be racist or how you can help society tear down these structures. But as a friend, I do feel okay saying, like, here are some things you can look into. Oh, you might want to learn about this, having those sorts of discussions. And I have run into a lot of white fragility, people who are just so blown away, and that cognitive dissonance takes over, and they're just like, there's no way this is going on, and why are you blaming me, and why are you so angry, and all that mess. And I just had to be patient. And those of them that truly care, that really wanted to be allies, they're the ones who came back and were willing to talk some more, or further the discussion. But I never really go out of my way, like, don't be angry at me. Like, I I don't have the energy. I don't care enough to try to persuade you to that extent. So if you're too fragile, then that's the end of the conversation. But I feel like, hey, at least I try. But people that I have these relationships with, most of the time they were able to talk it out and come to a place of understanding. And I think those are the most special moments in my social justice goals, when we are able to have an honest conversation and some sort of, I've seen so many times my friends have this like aha moment, like, oh my gosh, I get it, and that's me doing my very tiny part in this very large world of social justice. So that's I oh, I would like to, encourage you to watch a video that I posted. I think this is like one of my more open ways. I guess I could call it open, but one of my clearest goals or attempts at social justice using social media. It was very new for me. Not I don't make videos like this often, hardly ever, but I watched I watched America versus Billie Holiday, the movie, and gosh, it was so heart wrenching and thoughtful and like honest, and it really took you to that place in time when America was just attacking this woman. And when I finished it, like, I wondered how many of my white evangelical friends would dare to watch that movie, and how many other movies about the Black experience that white evangelicals would neglect to watch because it's not in their bubble, right? It's not a Christian film, and there's cursing and there's sexual activity or nakedness and violence, and the word nigga is being thrown around like free popcorn, you know what I mean? And so it's like, how many of them are too uncomfortable or have too strict boundaries to be able to watch these films that are just such a fundamental part of expressing our history and these experiences that these powerful people in Black history have lived through, right? And I think you can read books and you can read articles and all that other jazz, but there's something really special about video, about movies that bring these people to life and their experiences to life and transports you there, and it garners empathy, right? And I think at the core of all this misunderstanding and of all these injustices, it's a lack of empathy. And so I made that video to try to encourage particularly white evangelicals to, mitigate those boundaries a little bit and consider, um, like, hey, if you got to fast forward at this part, but most of the movie, the context is so worth it and you're missing out. And it's not like they're being taught these things in school. And it's not like all the movies are this 100% clear depiction of who these people were. But I think it's so important to see those stories and get a better understanding. And so the video, I won't repeat all of it because it's in the video, but I think, um, you know, I wasn't, again, I'm not the most comfortable doing videos like this, but I felt it was important. And I wanted them to know, like, hey, this is a thing. There's a way to get a better understanding, and like, you can enjoy a very good movie and support like the black producers and black actors in doing so. So that is my final offering for the social justice project, and I will send that video as well for your consideration. But yeah, at the end of the day, I feel that one of the more silent fights in social justice is the urge for white evangelicals to be, and I know this is cliche, but it's true, like on the right side of history, right? And I just feel that I've been placed in a certain position to be able to help share the black perspective and why it is important for them to feel some accountability in breaking down structural racism in various ways that they can do so. So, thank you for listening to my story. Um, and also, I want to say, I just think it's important for people to understand that there are so many ways to promote social justice and equality and the dismantling of social structures. And we have the gift and privilege of social media and using our social capital to spread awareness. So, if you can't march, that's okay. You can't march, but you can post something that makes it clear that, something's wrong and people need to do something about it. And then the onus is on that person how they can actively affect change. But you can post, resources um, and things like books or organizations that you can support with your funds to help support various movements and fights for different forms of social justice. So I think that is something that I learned over time, and I think is very valuable for all of us who are witnessing the atrocities going on today and feel an obligation to try to make some sort of difference. And in my experience, what I did was use where I am in my life and the connections that I have right now to naturally find myself in a position to just be involved in complicated and uncomfortable conversations and willing to bear the weight of that in the effort to help implement some social justice. Okay, thank you for your time and have a great day.